I acknowledge that I live, practice art and study on the land of the Boonwurrung people, and we join LCI Melbourne classes delivered from the land of the Wurundjeri people. I acknowledge that sovereignty of the land of the Kulin Nation was never ceded. I pay respect to their elders, past, present and emerging, and I acknowledge the pivotal role that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people continue to play within the Australian community in general and the arts and culture communities in particular.
Hi, I'm Barbara Tipper, LCI Melbourne student and mixed media artist, and I'm here in residence in Tamundamai Country Retreat on beautiful Boonwurrung country on the Mornington Peninsula.
I celebrate nature in my art, with it being my muse, my substrate and my art materials. In 2019 I was taught how to make watercolour paint from stones by Yorta Yorta artist and my friend and mentor Lorraine Brigdale. The purpose of this Skills Share video is to demonstrate how you could easily make your own earth pigment paints from clay or stones you find. Distinct from fugitive botanical paints and inks, which are made from plant matter like tea, onion skins, flower petals, etc., ochre pigments are mineral and will not fade or discolour. They have been how they are for millions of years. I will take you through 8 simple steps as follows. Forage, clean and dry, grind, sieve, mull, make paints and inks, store, share, and I'll introduce you to tools as we use them. The best places to find earth pigments are outside wherever you are, at a river, beach, on top of an ant mound, around ruins or old buildings, old crumbling bricks and mortar are great, and at a dig, like a building site or mine. Seek permission from landowners to forage. Do not take from sacred sites or national parks. It is illegal and disrespectful. You will know if a rock is suitable for pigment if you can make a mark with it, if it leaves some of its pigment behind on a surface. Take only as much as you need. Keep a record of where you found it and who the original custodians of that place are. In this way, you're educating yourself at the same time as honouring its ancient origins. You'll know where to go back for more if needed, and it may help you with naming the colour. If your foraged sample is not completely dry, you need to let it dry out. Probably best done in the sun, but any dry, airy place is fine. The dirt, clay or stone you've found might not be the same colour all over or might be cross-contaminated from what it was near. You could simply brush or scrape away any surface contamination or use a wire brush if it's really hard. The first step to transform your dry sample from rock to pigment powder is to break it up into smaller pieces. Use a hammer if you need to, and grind it with a hard mortar and pestle. Protect your eyes from flying pieces and wear a mask to avoid inhaling dust that can clog up your lungs. A stone or marble mortar and pestle are best, and the size of your mortar determines how much you can grind at once. Less is best, and you don't need very much at all to make paint. Too much and you will quickly lose heart. It can be really hard work depending how hard the stone is. Chalky soft, of course, is the easiest. Keep your mask on. Once you've ground your stone as finely as you can with mortar and pestle, sieve it with a fine sieve. A kitchen or tea strainer works great. Into a storage container. I prefer small jars. You now have your pigment powder. You can stop at this stage and just store your pigments this way until you want to use one as paint. You could take your pigment powder and just add water and mix and have a paint, which is fine for face painting to be washed off later. But for painting on paper or canvas or any substrate for a more permanent work of art, your pigment doesn't just need to flow, but it needs help to bind to the substrate. Once dried, a water-only pigment paint would easily brush off and smudge. It will also need preserving once it's wet. So here's where a list of ingredients is required, along with skill and endurance to effectively mix them together into paint or ink. Use just 4 teaspoons of pigment powder on the centre of your strong glass work surface. I use a microwave plate from the op shop. Put a dent in the middle and add your wet ingredients. Water, about 10 drops. Gum arabic, about 4 drops. This is your binder. You can get gum arabic in a powder form as well, or you could use a clear native tree resin. Add 1 drop of honey or glycerin. This is for preserving and conditioning your paint. You can get glycerin just at the supermarket, and I choose to use glycerin rather than honey, just so that my paints are vegan friendly. And 1 drop of essential oil. This is also to preserve and condition your paint and to make it smell nice, not like a swamp. Most people would use clove oil. I use lemongrass, that's my signature scent. Mix with a palette knife until combined. You can take your mask off now that you don't have any powder floating around. And now you have paint, but it will be coarse and gritty if you don't mull it. Mulling can be quick or take a long time, depending on the hardness of your pigment. A purpose-made muller is this glass tool with an ergonomic handle to grip and a flat bottom to do the work. It's heavy, so you don't need to exert much pressure. A flat bottom beer glass could do the job. I like to mist the plate as well with water to assist the mulling process. Work in small circular motions. There are no rules about how to smoothly mull the entire mix, but I like to work around the outside, gradually picking up more pigment from inside the centre and spreading it out further. You'll know your paint is ready by feel and sound. It will start to feel more smooth and slippery and less gritty. You will also sense if you need to add more water or gum arabic or glycerin. You may need to scrape the paint back to the centre a couple of times and continue mulling until it is perfect. One of the pleasures of mulling is seeing the gorgeous dendritic print on the surface of the muller as you lift it from its suction grip with the glass plate. I often take a print from this, although that does use a generous portion of the paint you've worked so hard to produce. Once you're happy with the consistency of your paint, scrape it all into the middle. It will have a beautiful, glossy, buttery consistency. You now have paint, and this can be used as gouache straight away. At this point you should make a swatch and test your paint for colour and flow properties, and that's the fun part of all your hard work. And now is the time to name it if you didn't already. These go into your records or journal, or however you like to manage your practice. This is the stage at which you might choose to turn your pigment into oil paint. Just add your linseed oil. Or you could try moulding it into a pastel stick. Just roll in baking paper and leave to dry. You might need to experiment with quantities of the additives to get the consistency you want from a pastel. To store the paint just as it is, as a wet paint, you could put it in a jar with extra water and gum arabic, and it would need a good shake each time before you use it. But more commonly, this would be stored dry for use as a watercolour. Put the paint into pans, a palette, or shells, or whatever is your preferred way of using watercolours. Some people who make watercolours like this in bulk to sell would fill their pans with multiple thin layers, waiting for it to dry between each layer, so then there's minimal shrinkage and the pans still look full when dry. To store and use as an ink, you could add your preferred ink medium, be it water, alcohol, acrylic. I like to store wet as an earth pigmented acrylic if I'm planning a bigger painting. I use 50/50 mulled paint and Floetrol. I get it from Bunnings in the paint section. It's cheaper than buying acrylic flow medium from art shops, which is a good tip, by the way, if you're into flow acrylics. The pigment is heavier than the acrylic and separates over time, but you just need to shake the jar before use. Storing your pigments is easy. Dry is always easier than wet for storage, so I recommend only storing as much wet as you will use quickly. Glass is great because you can see what's inside and there's no threat of colour fade if exposed to light. If you have mixed botanical pigments with your earth pigments, you will need to keep them from light and only use them for non-archival projects. Be sure to label your stored pigments and paints. You can buy purpose-built tins for storage of your watercolour pans, or find pretty tins in op shops. So once you have one or more earth pigment paints, you can make some earthy art. Choose earthy subjects. You will feel grounded with a close connection to place using paints you have foraged and made yourself. And it will show in your art and minister to people who view it. This art medium connects you with Indigenous artists across the ages and pigment artists around the world and will enrich your practice. You will find a tribe of us on Instagram if you follow the hashtags natural pigments and earth pigments. And I would encourage you in your natural pigments journey to contribute what you learn to this community and take inspiration from your fellow grounded artists. And you can find me on Instagram. My handle is naturefileart. See you there.